May I have your attention, please? Thank you for coming to the last Jones seminar of the full term. The next Jones seminar, can you hear me? The next Jones seminar will be January 7. I know some of you are pretty happy about that. Reminder, out of courtesy, please refrain from using laptops. And judging from past experience, it's reasonable to expect that many of our students will go on to start new businesses or be influential in guiding businesses through innovation. We have a MEM program and a PhD innovation track who may find today's talk particularly informative. I invited Chris Trimble to talk to us about innovation. Chris is from the Tuck School and researches how businesses navigate the difficult transition from having an idea to implementing it. Chris is a graduate of the University of Virginia. He's not completely strange to engineering. He got a degree in mechanical and nuclear engineering and practiced his craft on U.S. submarines and holds also an MBA from Tuck.
Thank you. Good afternoon. You guys look great up there. It's good to be here at the Thayer School of Engineering. First question I was asked when I arrived, how was your trip? I had to say, not too tough. 100-yard walk straight across Tuck Circle. As Alex said, I did start my career in engineering. I was a submarine officer in the U.S. Navy. There's a whole lot I liked about that experience. One of the things that I liked was just walking down the pier each day. These big concrete piers, giant ships on either side, the smell of diesel fumes and salt air, sounds of welding and hard work getting done. Just a real, gut sense that you were in the midst of real work. Something I must say I never get when walking around management consulting firms or investment banks and seeing computers and people finely dressed in suits and ties. It's not quite the same. I also loved mastering all the technology on nuclear submarines, from nuclear power plants to sonar systems to spy cameras. But if there was one thing that drove me nuts about the U.S. Navy, is that it was impossible to change anything. Even as simple as I wanted to write performance evaluations differently for the people that work for me. Sorry, there was a form for that, and I was to fill out the form. This was how my interest in innovation, and how my interest in innovation in large organizations in particular, was born. And I'd love to tell you what I've learned since coming to Tuck. I've been here as a professor over at the Tuck School for the last 10 years now, focused on just one question, and that is best practices for executing an innovation initiative. I've got about 45 minutes or so of remarks prepared. I don't mind interruptions at any time. During the presentation, though, let's keep it to short questions that I can clarify quickly, and then we'll have plenty of time for open Q&A and debate towards the end. The way I like to engage people in conversations about innovation is by telling stories. That's how you learn. And I'm going to start today with a very short and simple innovation story. And you have a job as I tell this story. You see, because I'm actually going to stop telling it before I get to the ending. And I'm going to ask you how you think the story ends. Now, this story is actually a story about a group of mountaineers that were making their very first effort to get to the top of Mount Rainier in the northwest United States. Now, believe it or not, more than 10,000 people try to climb this mountain each year, despite the fact that, as you can see, it is covered with snow and ice and glaciers. It might be the most difficult climb in the world that is actually accessible to novices. Okay? You or I, with a few months of training, we could do it, just so long as we were accompanied by an expert guide. Now, our group of climbers woke up just a few minutes after midnight, and they'd hardly slept at all. Nonetheless, they were alert, they were excited, They were ready to go because this was an adventure they had been thinking about for months. First hour of the climb wasn't so hard, but each subsequent hour got a little bit harder, until finally, at dawn, they got their very first glimpse of the summit of Mount Rainier. And it was exactly as they had imagined it. It was majestic. It was inspiring. It was just glistening in the morning sun. And so our climbers focused their energies inward and concentrated on getting to the top. But with each additional step, their labors grew more difficult. Muscles ached. The air got thinner. The climbers got dizzier. And some began to contemplate the very real possibility that they might not make it. Well, I'm happy to tell you that this group of climbers was particularly strong, and they persevered, and they made it to the summit. And they were jubilant, because to be on top of Mount Rainier is to feel like you are on top of the world. And they were so excited. But you know what? The adventure for this group of climbers wasn't over yet. Why not? They still had to get back down. And in fact, the expert guides are very well aware of the fact that it is actually the descent from Mount Rainier that is the far more dangerous part of the journey. Now, climbing a flight of stairs, sure, that's harder than coming back down. Even climbing Mount Musalak is probably harder than coming back down. But Mount Rainier is different. Okay? It is a dangerous mountain, one that claims a few lives each and every year. Snow on the surface of the glacier can collapse into interior caves and tunnels. Giant slabs of ice can suddenly just break away. And climbers can fall into deep crevasses. And making matters worse, the dangers only go up as the day goes on. Because the sun gets higher, the temperatures rise, the snow gets softer, and the climbers get more and more fatigued and more likely to make a mistake. Now, here's the interesting thing. No matter how many times the experts warn the climbers of the dangers of the descent, what do they do at the top? They relax. They celebrate. Their big dream, their big aspiration has been fulfilled. Everything else is just an afterthought. And so it was that our climbers, having invested very little emotional energy in the descent, and having very little physical energy remaining, took their first few steps down the other side of the mountain. Now, folks, this is it. This is your big moment. This is when you get to finish the story. Okay? Take just 10 seconds to imagine what you think happens next. All right, now, let me warn you in advance that what you tell me next will tell me a great deal about this audience. Raise your hand if you imagine that they made it down okay. Raise your hand if you imagine that they fell into a deep crevasse never to be seen again. Okay. What I've just learned is that engineering audiences aren't as optimistic as business audiences. Business people are just incurable optimists. No matter what you tell them, no matter how many times I do this, I always get 10 hands for they made it down safely for every one that says they didn't. Here's the point of the story. There is a Mount Rainier-like summit in every innovation journey. It is the moment when you say, by gosh, that is a fantastic idea. What an amazing breakthrough. Let's take it to market. Okay? Let's make things happen. Let's go forward. And getting to that breakthrough idea, as many of you are involved in now, that might require years of scientific research. Okay? Months of building prototypes. Might involve a lot of financial and strategic analysis, market research, lots of creative brainstorming. And so when you finally get to that big idea, that breakthrough moment, it can feel like a huge victory. Okay? But an idea is just an idea. After the big idea comes the other side of innovation. That's the challenge of getting from big idea to big real-world impact. And as it is with Mount Rainier, all of the most unexpected dangers, all of the hidden pitfalls are on the other side of innovation. And so what we're going to do today is roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty and find out what the other side of innovation is really all about. There is one primary, most foundational reason why the other side of innovation is so difficult, and it is this. It is because innovation and day-to-day operations are always and inevitably in conflict. Innovation and day-to-day operations are always and inevitably in conflict. And in fact, on the managerial side, once you get past the big breakthrough, the art of managing innovation is very much an art of navigating these conflicts. Now, before we get to solutions, how you navigate these conflicts, how you make innovation happen, we need to at least define our terms a little bit. And no term has been so laboriously and in such complex fashion defined as innovation. And in fact, if you do a little reading and a little research, you can find any number of innovation typologies and categorizations. Maybe you've heard there's a difference between sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation, between incremental innovation and radical innovation. And I'm just getting started here, and I even ran out of room on this slide before I, completed the list. Okay. And I'll tell you that all of these terms, all of these qualifiers are useful on this side of innovation when you're trying to assess what the impact of your idea might be in the market. But fortunately for our purposes today, none of these qualifiers really have anything to do with the other side of innovation. Okay? And in fact, in general, all the managerial techniques that work on the creative side of innovation only get in the way on the execution side. So we're going to be able to go with a very simple and very broad definition of innovation. Okay? One I think that it's safe to say will not exclude anything. Okay? Innovation is any project that is new to you or your company as opposed to new to the world, okay? And any project that has an uncertain outcome. Okay? New to you and uncertain outcome. And I'm only going to go slightly beyond this very simple definition and suggest we think about a spectrum of innovation initiatives, from fairly easy to execute to quite difficult to execute. Now, on the left side of this spectrum, I want you to imagine a salesperson trying out a new sales pitch. Okay? Very short, only involves one person. That's the easy side. On the very hard side, I want you to imagine a large established corporation launching a high-risk, high-growth potential new venture. Okay. Easy to hard. Now, we've been studying the other side of innovation, as I mentioned, for about 10 years, and over that time period have compiled about 36 case studies that span this spectrum from left to right. And what we've learned is there are, in essence, just 3 models for the other side of innovation, 3 ways to make innovation happen. Now, 2 of the 3, Model 1 and Model 2, are actually pretty well understood and pretty well practiced by a lot of corporations. Okay? So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on Model 1 and Model 2, except to describe them briefly and to describe their limits as a way of setting some context. Model 3, on the other hand, not even the best companies in the world have got this nailed. And we have worked with the companies that you'll find every year on Fortune's list of most innovative companies, and we've seen that they struggle with Model 3 just like everyone else. They may have some success stories, but they can't honestly tell you that they know exactly how to do it again. Okay? So we'll spend most of our time talking about what we've learned through our research about Model 3, but let's start with a little bit of context by describing Model 1 and Model 2. Model 1, I think you'll recognize. I like to describe it as the innovation is everybody's job every day model. Okay? Innovation is everybody's job every day. There are some companies that are well known for taking this approach. 3M has a 15% time policy where you're encouraged to take 15% of your time and direct yourself towards projects that are of interest to you. Google has adopted a similar policy.
Is 3M's policy
Yeah.
only for researchers or for everyone?
It is limited in their case, I think, to researchers. Yep. And this can be a powerful approach, and a lot of companies get a lot done this way. But there is a very common sense limitation to what this model can do for you. And that is people are busy. Okay? 15% of your time is not that much. You might have a small sliver of free time, and your friend might have a small sliver of free time, and you might get a little more done by working together. But still, we're talking about a very small resource base. This is, in essence, a model for making innovation happen within tiny little slivers of free time that exist in every organization. So the limit here has everything to do with what you might think of as slack time. And corporations actively try to eliminate or at least minimize slack time. And that is what creates the fundamental limit for this first model. You can generate a lot of ideas and a lot of proposals this way. You can get a lot of small projects done this way, but nothing more. Okay. Model 2, I like to think of as the let's treat innovation just like any other business process model. Okay. Let's script it. Let's break it down into steps that we can follow. Let's let people specialize in one step so they get really good at it. And let's measure the process. Let's make it efficient. Let's make it as routine as possible. And a lot of companies do this really well. Okay. The automakers, for example, who bring out a certain number of new cars each year. That's a long and expensive process to bring a new car to market. And believe me, they've got every step laid out. And they know how much each step costs and how long it should take. And this is a good model. You can certainly get far beyond the limitations of slack time. But it really only works so long as what we're talking about is bringing out, say, this year's version of last year's model. Okay? As soon as you make any dramatic departures from precedent, you break your process. Okay? So here the limitation is you can't get beyond repeating with small variations what you've done in the past. Okay? Put these two together and you can get a lot of innovation done. But there's a lot of projects that are just out of reach. Okay? And what you'll see is most companies need to go beyond the limits of Model 1 and Model 2. In fast-changing industries like IT or media, okay, they need to get beyond Model 1 and Model 2 almost every year. Okay. So we're going to dig in now a little bit to Model 3 and see what it's all about. And I'm going to do that with another story. Now let me tell you that all of the stories I'll tell you today are 100% true, except for this one. Now, this one is entirely a figment of my imagination. But as I tell it, I want you to be thinking. I want you to be thinking about what you like about the story and what you don't. Nothing more than that, what you like about the story and what you don't. Here we go. It was the best of times for Mammoth Corporation. Stock price was going up quarter in and quarter out. Earnings were through the roof. Customers were happy. Employees were happy. Heck, suppliers thought it was an honor just to be able to do business with this great company. But one year, a new technology changed the industry, and unfortunately, Mammoth was late on a new product launch. And later that year, something unprecedented happened. The company disappointed Wall Street. It missed its earnings targets. Its stock price tumbled. Well, I'm happy to tell you that the senior leadership team was very strong, and they quickly rose to the challenge of restoring Mammoth's glory. And the CEO got up in front of the entire company and gave a big speech. And he sent word out to every employee that Mammoth was in search of the next big idea. And the company held innovation workshops and innovation seminars and innovation retreats, all in an effort to catalyze this search. And eventually, all that work paid off. From a dusty cubicle deep within one of Mammoth's sub-basements, there emerged a visionary, our hero, a leader with the next big idea. Now, I'll tell you, Mammoth's management team was very careful. They did their research. They called on outside experts. They examined this opportunity from every conceivable angle. And then they committed some money to it. They said, by gosh, this probably is the next big idea. We've got it. Let's go forward. And that, my friends, is how our hero landed his dream job, leading Mammoth into the future. I think you can imagine it probably wasn't quite so simple as all of that. And indeed, our hero soon discovered the truth about large organizations, that they are like machines designed to excel at yesterday's business. And our hero ran into roadblocks and barriers and entanglements. People that demanded that he follow procedure. People that stood in the way of hires that he needed to make. People that told him over and over again that he wasn't going to succeed if he didn't follow Mammoth's best practices. And you know, within just a few months, inspiration became desperation. It got so bad that our hero woke up one night in a cold sweat. He'd had a horrible dream. And in that dream, he'd been wrestled to the ground and nearly strangled to death by a giant octopus. Now, our hero immediately understood the significance of this dream, and he resolved right then and right there that he was going to defeat that octopus, no matter what it took. Mammoth was not going to be allowed to destroy its own future. Well, folks, something else happened that night, something frankly a bit mysterious. You see, when our hero woke up the next morning, he realized that he had powers, that he was strong, he was ready to charge. He was, in a word, Innovation Man. An Innovation Man charged into work that day. And when he ran into barriers, he smashed right through them. And he was even clever enough not to fight every battle head on. He sort of went underground, broke some rules, nurtured a conspiracy. And eventually, that worked. The next big idea became Mammoth's biggest and most profitable business. Our hero was promoted, and promoted again until he became Mammoth's chief executive. And just a few years later, he retired. Rich, happy, and well, just a tad overweight. That's the story. I ask you to be thinking about what you like about the story and what you don't. I'd love to get just a few responses, but first I want you to only respond with things that you liked about the story. Anybody? Thank you. Yes, sir.
That ideas can come from anywhere.
Yeah, this is a company that believed that and actually looked for ideas and listened to an idea from a most unlikely place. What else did you like about the story? Yeah, Mark?
He didn't give up.
He didn't give up, right? Persistence pays. What else? Yes?
No, the Mammoth was sort of the super company that I wanted to turn people into the middle. It's a good story progression, like good, and then it was and then kind of got better and started collecting things.
Okay, yep. Did you like that he broke the rules and defeated the system? Okay, good. What else? Yeah,
Innovations driven by individuals.
good. Yep. This is about how one person changed the world. What else? Yeah.
I like the fact that the feedback was all negative of the company.
Yeah. Why did you like that?
Because that's the way it is.
Because that's the way it is, right? All right. Let's change tacks now. What did you dislike about this story? What bugged you about it? Yes, sir.
What about the follow-up? What did he do to allow the next guy like him to come?
Yeah. It sort of gives you the sense that this was a one-hit lucky shot, didn't it?
I wonder if he doesn't care about the future.
Good. What else did you dislike about this story? Yes, sir.
A fairy tale with a happy ending. The over is the real world.
Okay, it's a fairy tale. It struck you as unrealistic.
Yes.
Good. Any more? Maybe one more. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this guy is innovative.
He doesn't retire that way. What do real innovators do?
They just go on forever.
Yeah, they keep innovating.
Die of a heart attack.
Or they die of a heart attack. Yes, ma'am.
That struck me as that with the amount of time that this guy gets stuck and then rejuvenate himself and completely again, that amount of time could have enabled a million
Yeah, that's right. And, it took a long time, and a competitor could easily have come along. And in fact, startups often do beat corporations despite the resource disadvantages that they face. I think it's time for me to come clean. I'll tell you that I like this story. I like its optimism. I like the message that one person really can change the world. And I like it that it presents the very reality that I spoke of earlier, that innovation and day-to-day operations are always in conflict. But if I have to be completely honest with you, I have to tell you that I like this story in exactly the same way I like reading superhero fantasies to my 5-year-old boy. Okay? This is no model for innovation. This is a fantasy. And yet, this story resonates. And in fact, when we go do our work and we talk to real organizations and real innovation leaders, we hear a lot of stuff that sounds a lot like this. 100 years ago, in the adolescence of medicine as a science, there was plenty of room for witch doctors. Okay? I say today we're in the adolescence of innovation management as a science. And as a result, there's still plenty of room for innovation mythology. We don't yet have Model 3. We have a myth. Okay? And the myth is the same. There's just one singular myth of corporate innovation. The protagonist is always some brilliant, inspired visionary. The antagonist is always this oversized, life-draining bureaucracy. Okay? The hero is always the innovator. The enemy is always the octopus. And in the myth, the innovator somehow always wins. Now, people live through stories. Let me tell you, no story is more powerful than this one when it comes to innovation. The mainstream business press gets this, and that's why it won't take you long, if you take the time to look, to find an article in the Wall Street Journal or an article in Business Week or Fast Company magazine in particular that follows this basic plot line. You may be amused to know that not that long ago, even in academic research, we were sort of wed to this myth. Most research about this topic focused on innovation leaders and what particular qualities they needed to have in order to fight the system and win. And just for your amusement, I'm going to share with you now the top 5 recommendations from one of the best books on this topic from one generation ago. Okay? Tip number 1, if you want to succeed as an innovator in your company, come to work each day willing to be fired. Tip number 2, circumvent any orders that are aimed at stopping your dream. Tip number 3, ignore. Any takers? Anybody want to try and finish this one?
Bureaucracy.
Ignore the bureaucracy. Usually I get your boss. The actual tip, ignore your job description. Number 4, work underground for as long as you possibly can. And finally, I know you can finish this one. Okay? Easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to get permission. This is the innovator versus the octopus through and through. This was cutting-edge thinking on leading innovation just one generation ago. I'm happy to say that business research has come a long way since then. We can do better, and if your model for making innovation happen in your company is just to turn loose some rebels, then you can do better too. Yeah, question? Yeah, about 20 years. The book that I was quoting from is a late 80s book. Okay. Yep. If we're going to tell a better story about innovation, okay, we're going to have to do 2 things in particular. One, we're going to have to place less focus on the big idea hunt and put more focus on execution. Most companies, when they get excited about catalyzing innovation, they put almost all their energy into the creativity part. They generate lots of ideas that they're never able to follow through on. Okay? If you remember nothing else from our chat, I hope you'll remember that in any great innovation story, the idea is chapter 1. Okay? I think Thomas Edison said it pretty well, too. He said genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration.
Which is why engineers always smell so bad.
That's right. The second transition we've got to make is we've got to quit putting so much emphasis on individual heroes and put more emphasis on organizational excellence. Organizations are far more powerful than people. And even though one person against the system may work once in a while, the probabilities are very, very low. And the reason they're so low is that organizations just aren't built for innovation. Quite to the contrary, they're built for ongoing operations. They are built to be what I call performance engines. Now, what does a performance engine do? Well, hey, it's great at serving your existing customers. It is outstanding at taking on your current rivals. It is fantastic at driving for efficiency and accountability. It is great at being on time, on budget, and on spec every day, every week, and every month. And most of all, it is great at delivering profits. Not a few years from now, but this quarter. Now, listen, all of this is good and powerful and right, and great companies run great performance engines. At the same time, it's not too hard to see how this is in conflict with innovation. And if you want to see that conflict most clearly, what you need to look at is the method of the performance engine, which is the same in every type of organization there is. Okay? The method of the performance engine is to make every task, every process, every activity as repeatable and as predictable as possible. Okay? As repeatable and predictable as possible. Much like a Porsche racing down the Autobahn. Predictably and repeatably. Okay? A performance engine. Repeatability is very powerful, okay? Because when a process becomes repeatable, you can break it down into small little steps and ask people to specialize in just one little step and organize the overall effort. Hey, specialization of labor has been around for hundreds of years, and it works. Predictability is just as powerful. When a process becomes predictable, you can measure it, and you can set standards and hold people accountable for delivering on those well-known, well-understood standards. Predictability works. Of course, the realities of innovation are exactly the opposite. Okay? Every innovation initiative is, by nature, non-routine and uncertain. Now, these are fundamental incompatibilities. They strike right at the heart of how organizations are designed, how managers are trained, even how accountants measure. So no wonder what I hear so often is, hey, Chris, you got to understand, if we're going to get anything done around here, we got to break all the rules. And I get it. I empathize. I know where that comes from. But guess what? Break all the rules just does not work. And I'm going to give you 3 reasons why. Okay. Number 1, innovators actually need the performance engine. Okay. Most obviously, it is profits from the performance engine that pay for innovation. How many of you think it's a good idea if you're in a startup to go anger your funders? Right? So you wouldn't do it in a company either. Okay? It's profits from the performance engine that pay for innovation. Second, it is very rare for a company to launch an innovation initiative that doesn't build on at least something that already exists. Okay? Whether that's an area of technical expertise, or a brand, or relationships with customers, or some physical plant of some kind, innovators need the performance engine. Number 2, break all the rules sounds a lot like break the performance engine. Let me tell you, if I'm the general manager that is being held accountable for being on time, on budget, and on spec every month, and I hear somebody say break all the rules, my immediate instinctive gut reaction is I'm going to break you. Okay? Break all the rules often sounds like no rules, as in we innovators are special. Okay? We don't need your silly rules. We're going to do our own thing. And that fuels the antagonism even more. If we're going to have a chance with innovation in large corporations, we need to start with mutual respect. And to get that, innovation leaders need to remember one thing more than anything else, and that is that conflict with the performance engine is normal. It's normal. Furthermore, it's the result of good people doing good work, trying to make that performance engine run as well as it possibly can. Okay? It's not about laziness. It's not about resistance to change. It's about good people doing good work. At the same time, performance engine leaders need to remember something even simpler, and that is that no performance engine lasts forever. Okay. Everybody see the headline recently about Blockbuster? Okay. Blockbuster failed to innovate in the face of competition from Netflix, and now it's no longer with us. Rest in peace, Blockbuster. Okay? No performance engine lasts forever. Now, if we're going to get beyond this starting idea of mutual respect, what we're going to need to do is go back to these incompatibilities. Okay? Because ongoing operations are repeatable, while innovation is non-routine, we're going to have to think differently about how we organize. And because innovation is uncertain, while ongoing operations are predictable, we're going to have to think very differently about planning. Now, there are many contexts, I find, where business people are pretty adept at thinking about organizing and planning. And over at Tuck, we even teach students to think about organizations at 3 levels. Okay, top level, what's the mission? What's the strategy of the organization? Middle level is the general management level. Okay, how is the organization structured? How do the administrative systems work? Okay. And third level is execution. What are the specific tactics on the front lines? And people get this, and this works. But something very strange happens when it comes to innovation. Companies seem to be very, very good at getting excited about a hot new idea, and then they jump straight to execution. Sounds like this. Steve, fantastic idea. Now go make it happen. Okay? And to do that is to skip right over these critically important questions about organizing and planning. It is, in fact, to assume that what works for the performance engine will work for innovation too. And that is a deadly assumption. And that gets us to our Model 3 equation, okay, similar to the first two, just a couple more terms. Okay, Model 3 is that innovation equals ideas plus leaders. Okay, I'm not going to talk about those because no company ever overlooks the need for an idea and a leader. But then a special kind of team and a special kind of plan. And these are the areas where companies get tripped up all the time. Okay. Special kind of team and a special kind of plan. The special kind of team takes this form, and there's more than meets the eye in this picture, so give me just a second to explain what's going on here. The special kind of team is always a partnership between 2 entities, okay? A dedicated team and a shared staff. Okay? The dedicated team is, as it sounds, dedicated to the project, dedicated to the innovation initiative. Probably full-time, at least nearly full-time. It is their dominant responsibility. Okay? The shared staff, as the name implies, does a little bit of both, does double duty. It is responsible both for innovation and ongoing operations. I also want you to notice that the icon I chose for the shared staff is the blue square, just like the performance engine. Now this is meant to imply that their organizational model does not change, because doing a big organizational change would be very disruptive for ongoing operations. And we're not going to let that happen just so we can run an experiment. Okay? So we minimize change on the left. In fact, all we do is ask the performance engine to do a little bit more work, not anything different. Yes, sir?
Sounds like it's relying on slack.
To make this model work well, you've got to add resources. You've got to be realistic. You've got to recognize that yesterday the shared staff had 1 job and today they have 2. Okay? Otherwise, the conflicts will kill you. The dedicated team, quite to the contrast, is represented by a blue diamond. Okay? Now, it's as though we took the shared staff and literally turned it on its side. It's a whole new organizational model, one custom designed for the task at hand. Nothing on the left can serve as precedent for what's going on the right, at least organizationally. Okay? Finally, partnership between the two. This is not an easy partnership to manage, in part because the dedicated team and the shared staff are structured so differently, but also because there are inevitably conflicts between innovation and ongoing operations, especially to your point, conflicts over resources. So those conflicts have to be adjudicated, usually from a very high level. Okay? This is a tough partnership to manage, but it can be done. This ends up being a very flexible model. You might see some situations where the dedicated team has a relatively narrow role and the performance engine does everything else. You might also see just the opposite. Okay? Remember the spectrum from easier to harder? The further you push out that spectrum, the more the dedicated team takes on. Yes, ma'am?
Does this say you have a research laboratory?
No, in fact, usually research organizations operate quite a bit differently from performance engines. And so usually I think of research organizations as being engaged in the front end of the innovation process.
I'm thinking of, for example, DuPont.
Yes.
It's changing its mind about whether it needs a research lab or not.
So no, this would be a model for organizing a team to take an idea out of the research lab and bring it to market. Okay. Yep. I'll add just a little bit more to this diagram, little structure around it. Again, the shared staff is part of the performance engine, but not the whole thing. Its reporting structure, whatever it is, doesn't change. There needs to be one project leader that's responsible for the initiative as a whole, that's responsible for this partnership. Okay. What makes this tricky is the conflicts and the fact that when the project leader and the general manager get in a fight, okay, the general manager always wins. Okay. He's got more power, more experience, and whatever he wants, he's got a short-term deadline involved. Okay. Meanwhile, the project leader is small, okay, doesn't have a whole lot of resources, and whatever he wants, his justification is very long-term and very big. Okay. So the only way this works is if there is someone even more powerful than that general manager involved getting their hands dirty and adjudicating conflicts even where they arise on the front lines. For example, in how much time a sales force will spend on existing products versus the new products. It's the only way this works. Typically, we talk through the process of building a team like this in 3 steps. Step 1 is divide the labor. That is, figure out what each party does. Okay. Step 2 is assemble the dedicated team. Step 3 is manage the partnership. And also on this slide are sort of the top line rules for how you do each. Okay. I've already mentioned all 3, so I will continue on. That's a special kind of team. Let's talk about a special kind of plan. Corporations are very good, and they have very good systems for routine year-to-year planning, wherein last year serves as a precedent for this year. Okay. That doesn't work at all for innovation, okay, where you should be writing your plans from scratch, and more than that, you should be treating your initiative as an experiment. Now, it's fairly easy to run an experiment, much harder to run what I'll call a disciplined experiment. Okay. A disciplined experiment you're all familiar with. You're all in science and engineering. Okay. You know what that's all about. Business people have planning habits and systems that get in the way, and they have a much harder time running a disciplined experiment. But the payoff is big. When you run an experiment in a disciplined way, you learn very quickly. And I'm not talking about general feel-good learning here. I'm talking about a very specific kind of learning, wherein your predictions get better. Okay? To me, that's what learning is all about. Every innovation initiative is full of wild guesses. Okay? What we're trying to do is turn wild guesses into informed estimates and eventually reliable forecasts, because better predictions give you better decisions and ultimately better results. Now, what trips up real companies in trying to run disciplined experiments more than anything else is the time for performance reviews. The moment that an innovation leader is evaluated is one of the most tenuous moments in any real innovation initiative, because corporations are in the habit of evaluating people based on the results they produce. That counts for 90% of your evaluation. Did you or did you not hit your target? Okay. But that's unrealistic when uncertainties are high. And so what do you do instead? Well, the main thing we think companies need to be doing more of is broadening their sense of accountability. Okay? Not just did you or did you not hit your numbers, but also did you do what you said you were going to do? Did you at least take the actions that we laid out, regardless of the results? And even more important than that, did you in fact run a disciplined experiment? Look, here's some questions that you ask if you're trying to evaluate whether somebody ran a disciplined experiment. You know, questions like, was there a clear hypothesis? Did everybody involved understand what the hypothesis was? If you changed the plan, did you do it on the basis of evidence? Or did you do it on the basis of gut feel and instinct? Okay? Are you trying to spend a little and learn a lot? There's two kinds of good outcomes from innovation initiatives. One is success, the other is a quick and cheap failure. Okay? What you want to avoid is the long, painful, expensive failure. Is the leader reacting quickly to new information? Are they getting defensive? Are they willing to admit that maybe things aren't going as well as they hoped they would? These are the types of questions that should be asked at the end of the year when it's performance review time. So that's a quick overview of a special kind of team and a special kind of plan, and therefore a quick overview of Model 3. Love to engage in your questions and reactions, whatever they may be. Oh. Alex.
We talked a little bit about that already. Why would it be advantageous for a company to go into the process that you just described rather than to wait for somebody in a small company to do it and then buy them out, as some companies have elected to do?
Yeah. Since it's so hard to do it inside, why not wait till somebody else does it and then acquire them? Certainly a lot of companies do this. There are a lot of pitfalls associated with acquisitions. You buy the company, you kill the culture, you kill the innovation. You hear stories like this all the time. More than that, acquisitions can be very expensive. And lots of companies overpay for the companies that they acquire. I'd like to think that corporations can get a lot better at nurturing innovation inside, and therefore the bias towards acquiring other small companies won't be so strong. Yeah. Mark?
Somebody hit this procedure, is it by chance, or is this, in other words, this is a hypothesis as you've expressed?
Yeah, no, I'm presenting theory as though it's gospel truth. Your instinct there is absolutely right. The work we do is subjective, it's interpretive, it's about generating hypotheses. We're hardly to the point in this field where we can prove anything. I spend almost as much time working with real companies as I do doing the research, and what gives me the most confidence is when people who've been there, who fought these battles, say, yes, this makes sense.
You're not far enough along where somebody's followed this through and kind of seen the nuts.
No.
I do have that opportunity to follow up with anybody.
So I'm advising a few different initiatives right now, but unfortunately they're multi-year initiatives, and so can I claim I've got the proof? No, I don't. Let's hope. Yes, sir.
Most companies have very short time horizon driven by stock valuation,
Yes.
immediate quarterly results.
Yes.
And one of the things you pointed out was that senior leadership needs to have a direct relationship with
Yep.
innovators, management team, in order to keep those concepts from sort of riding over top of the innovation.
Yeah.
How can you have a senior leader who has that kind of motivation if his compensation is tied to working numbers, which inevitably are going to get dragged down by R&D?
So my personal opinion is the strength of the tie between CEO compensation and stock price is like business's original sin. It's the worst possible thing for innovation. I completely agree with you. There are a lot of CEOs out there that understand that and do the right thing anyway. We've done a lot of work, for example, with GE, and Jeff Immelt will tell you I'm the project manager for several small projects throughout the company. It's unusual for CEOs to say that, but I sure like it if there were a lot more. Yes, sir.
What do you see as the role of design or innovation consulting firms that sort of have the ability to create a culture that's kind of more based on innovation, and then they're able to sort of be that piece for other? How
So creating an innovative culture, mostly what that buys you is better ideas. And so I think that stuff is great that you're thinking about. I think there should be more of it, but it's not going to get you through the other side of innovation. It's just going to give you better ideas. Personal opinion, companies need more help on the other side. But let's face it, this side of innovation is the exciting side, right? It's the fun side. Everybody wants to be the one that makes that breakthrough, that has that breakthrough inspiration and has their name attached to it forever, right? It's hard to overcome that. So I think companies will always overinvest in the creative side of innovation and underinvest in the execution side. Yeah?
So when you talk about Model 3, there's a lot of restructuring there, and I'm wondering, don't the same challenges that traditionally face innovation face the innovation putting in Model 3? I mean,
Well, there's not actually a lot of restructuring there. Remember, we didn't touch the performance engine at all. This is very limited, very targeted change just for one project. Within the dedicated team, it should feel like building a new company from scratch, much like a startup would do.
but it's not just a separate thing, you've got the shared work.
You have to. Otherwise, if you're not building on anything that already exists, you as a company have forfeited your only advantage over a big startup, which is that you have something to build on, right? So their partnership has to be there. Yes, sir.
Along those lines, are CEOs being proactively taught Model 3?
So Model 3 is laid out in a book that my co-author and I just published 4 months ago, and we're doing our darndest. Okay? Yeah. We're doing, and there are other books that focus on the other side of innovation that have similar recommendations. So yes, progress is being made. But most companies, I think, are still, the innovation leaders are going by instinct and experience and gut feel in this area. A lot of innovation leaders have really good instincts and really good gut feel and do really well. We're trying to codify what they're doing and make it easier for others to follow in their footsteps. Yes, sir?
How many companies where the investors their values sort of align with the innovation model? How many of these companies are really successful? For instance, it's a private company.
Yeah.
So it's not run by Wall Street's expectations every 3 months.
Yeah.
And are these companies overly successful compared to the ones which are trying to innovate, like GE or the?
Yeah. Well, privately owned companies do have a big advantage over publicly owned companies, precisely because that pressure for quarter-to-quarter earnings is not as strong. And some of the big privately owned companies, I'm thinking of Cargill, Mars, make for some very interesting case studies because they do tend to have a longer time horizon, and that is definitely healthy for innovation. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Did your last slide have a Model 4 that I saw?
No, there's no Model 4 yet, though. There's always more work to be done.
That would be for startups, would it?
I suppose so. So all of the work we've done is established companies. I do tend to talk mostly about large companies that you recognize. I often get asked, do these ideas apply to startups? Well, they apply just as soon as you start to look like a performance engine. People specialize, focused on repeatability and predictability in particular, and you can find that in companies that have 30 to 50 people. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just curious on your take on how large companies address the fact that if you have somebody who's developed a new idea, it's much more profitable for them to lead development on their own and sell it back rather than just take the salary.
So yeah, if you've got a great idea and you're facing all these barriers in a big company, why not just leave and do it on your own? Again, the big reason that you wouldn't do that is you give up something extremely valuable. So if I had maybe 20 more minutes today, I would have shared the story of the New York Times company and their launch of New York Times Digital. And the guy that did that, he would have been nuts to leave the company and try and do this on his own, right? How can you start a news website without the content and the brand that the New York Times offers? So that's the main reason. Slightly more cynically, I think people that end up working for corporations just don't have the risk tolerance that it takes to go out and start a company on their own. Yes, sir?
Well, she asked about a Model 4.
Yeah.
Where do you put someone like in academia or elsewhere who is just a scientist, is looking in basic research,
Yeah.
taking for granted that what they find will be used by others, but they're not part of the engine.
If you'll permit me, this is a nice lead-in. Yeah. Well, mostly I think it's important to recognize that research organizations are already quite good at forming dedicated teams to solve problems that then need to be taken to market. Research organizations tend to be far more flexible than what I've described here as performance engines. But at some point, there has to be a handoff to the groups that can take it to market, and that's where you run into trouble. So the more the researchers understand this model, the more they can contribute to a better handoff.
Right, but that's looking outside of the researcher, him or herself, who may not worry about compensation. They're looking for something in truth. We do have people like that, don't we?
Oh, of course we do. And I think a lot of people in the innovation game are motivated by impact on the world or motivated by truth. A lot of business people are too, believe it or not. But I don't follow your question because I don't quite understand how being motivated by truth or being motivated by having an impact on the world is in conflict with the ideas I've presented here.
Well, I just from your model 3, it
Yeah.
looks as if the innovator was a major part of the new organization.
I see.
To get it going, and that's not always the case.
No, and in fact, there's quite a bit of research shows that the people that come up with the idea or nurture it in the early stages are very often not the same kind of people that that excel at the next stage or even the stage after that. So there does have to be handoffs along the way. No question about that. Listen, I'd like to close, since I see we're getting towards the end here, with something that's a little off topic. Because the way I was noticed and the reason I was asked to come speak here today doesn't have anything to do with the other side of innovation. It has to do with the fact that the Economist magazine invited me to present or to argue in a debate. I got a letter from the Economist magazine. We noticed your book on innovation, and we're about to have a debate. And I don't know if you've been to their website, but they make a statement, and then they have one expert of some kind arguing for it and one expert of some kind arguing against it. And the motion that they asked me to argue against was this. The motion was that the best way to stimulate more innovation is to invest more money in science and engineering and mathematics education. So let me ask for your gut reaction here. Keep in mind, I had to argue against this. If I had been here and I had been able to ask your advice whether I should or should not engage in this debate, what would you have told me? How many of you think, yeah, that's worthwhile, go ahead? Okay, all right. How many would have said, Chris, you have no chance, you're going to lose? Okay, that's right. The argument I laid out, best I could, was that markets tell you about how scarce things are. And one thing that it's hard to find evidence of is rapidly escalating salaries for scientists and engineers. Doesn't say anything at all about, well, certain fields, yes, but in general, hard to find that evidence. Now, doesn't say anything at all about the intrinsic value of the work that scientists and engineers do. It just says something about their scarcity. So that was my argument. I thought that was reasonable, level-headed. What I learned from the debate was very emotional. Anytime you get into anything that might be perceived as what's the relative value of engineers and scientists versus business people. And I think what I learned was the perception on one side is way overpaid, way overvalued, which I agree with, and scientists and engineers, on the other hand, not nearly appreciated enough. That's what I learned. The amount of emotional tension there is very, very high. And I'll close simply by saying this. Some of the most valuable people I've seen in my work are people that can bridge the two communities. And if you're going to be in the engineering community, I urge you to get to know as many business people as you can and get used to communicating with them. And I say the same thing over at Tuck to people who are interested in innovation and want careers in innovation in companies. Most important thing you can do is spend as much time with scientists and engineers as you can. I hope that's a useful message to leave you with. I got slaughtered in the debate. It's no surprise in retrospect, but I did learn something along the way. Alex?
May I have the concluding remark by repeating that you're just an engineer in disguise?
That's right. That's right. Thank you.